Hello, my name's Mark, otherwise known as Pipes around the place, and this is Confessions of a Red Teamer. Now, this is a much softer talk than I'd usually like to be giving at a conference. I'd rather be talking about some binary shenanigans or some cool war stories or something, but I got some stuff that's been on my chest that I really want to get off it, and it basically comes out of a number of years of executing agile red teams. So, my day job at Insomnia Security is officially network ransacker. I got appointed that title after exfiltrating 15 gigs of documentation on one of my first red teams. And when asked why, I said because I needed to understand how it all worked. And so they decided that I was a ransacker, and that's stuck ever since. I work for Team Red, right? So I'm in offensive security. I don't do any defensive stuff. The customers I work with are trying to do defensive stuff. But really it's about, my day job is about breaking into places. And what I want to do today is talk about some strategies to make my job harder. My job is relatively easy, and it has been easy for the last 6 years of active red teaming. It's been easy for the last 11 years of pen testing and various other sort of AppSec jobs. And one of the things that bugs me is I always want to see stuff get harder for me, more challenging. So rather than give a war story rant on how we've stormed through organizations and we've put off cool attacks, what I thought is we'll discuss some strategies today. Some strategies on how organizations can really get the best bang for their buck, apply some strategies that really work in hindering my job. So before I dive into that, I really just want to bring back into people's memories a threat model. Threat modeling is kind of important if you're on the defensive side. This is the James Mickens threat model. If you go back and read his original Usenix paper, it's great. And his main point is, look, if Mossad or NSA or GCHQ or GCSP or ASD or whoever it is really want to get you, right, they're going to get you, right? You can't really threat model against it, right? They have more resources than the average attacker. And the point that I want to take away from this slide today, and the point that I want to keep in the back of our minds as we go through today, is that not all attackers are created equal. Not all attacks are equal, and the resources of attackers are not all equal, right? And so it's really important to keep that in mind as we start considering the defensive strategies that we're going to put into place. Now, one of the problems with red teaming is that we like to think ourselves as cyber special forces operatives, storming the cyber Taliban and cyber Kabul, and with cool weapons and like drones and laser guided missiles and stuff. But really it's about computer security. It's about coming down to I don't think that was me, dude. Yeah. It's about computer security, right? It's about attacking systems. Systems are built by humans generally, and about going through that process. So while we like to think of it as the special forces go through everything, you know, mad rampage against the systems, it's really just about computer security. So this is the secret to any given red team. They're going to get creds and own stuff. And that's pretty much about it. How they get creds will vary, right? It might be a phishing attack, it might be getting an initial foothold through a macro on a document, then dumping credentials out of memory. It may be just calling up and asking for the password. It may be a side channel attack such as the wireless MS-Chat v2 that was mentioned earlier by Faz. But the point is we're going to get creds and own stuff because that's our job, right? And we could do the hard way of owning stuff if we're looking inside an organization, but really if I can just get your password and log in as you to get access to the data that I'm interested in, it's a whole lot easier. Now, obviously when it comes to dealing with management, or even my parents, when I try to explain what I do for a living, going around saying I get creds and own stuff doesn't really cut it. So, like every good InfoSec professional, I really like to sort of distill my job down into analogies. And the main analogy that I have is associated with the car industry. Now, the problem with car analogies in security is if you do that, there's a journalist sitting in the room looking over his glasses at you going, you're a muppet, right? Because security, especially computer security and the car manufacturing industry do not align, right? So the analogies just don't work. So we'll skip that one. What my job really is, I play pinball all day. And this worked brilliantly to explain my job to my mother. If your table is your network, right? and I'm player one, it's my job to navigate the table. Now, pinball's an emotional journey, right? Like, if you've ever played pinball, there's mechanics involved, there's lots of moving parts, there's lots of trips, there's tilt prevention, there's all sorts of stuff going on the table. And my ability to control and move on that table from the very beginning is basically I have a couple of flippers and a ball on the table, right? So if I'm looking at it from a point of view of attacking the environment, I may not have played the table before. I may have played tables that were made by the same manufacturer, but of slightly different configurations. I may have played the exact same table built by the same service providers that has a different branding on the table. But I have to come up with a set of strategies, right? I have to come up with an approach to sort of tackle your table and go through it. So as I play on the table, I have a ball, right? And this ball might be a shell on a user's desktop. It might be a set of credentials. It might be a strange sort of DMZ sort of approach, and it may be any sort of manner of thing that you can think of that's gotten me somewhere near your environment. And there's a problem, right? And that's to play the game, to get the credits, to get the balls, I have to put money into the machine. The more balls I lose while I'm playing the game, the more money I have to pump into the machine. I fondly remember the first time my mother told me off for spending $6 playing pinball at Cobb & Co once in New Zealand. And I fondly remember the first time I went 2 days over a red team gig by my boss. And that's because parents and bosses care about money, right? They care about how you spend your time and how you spend your money. And so what I want to take away today is the philosophy of, if you can get me to spend more money to play on your table, then you're going to have some pretty good success rate and hindering me and frustrating me and taking me into places that you don't get to usually see, that red teamers don't usually talk about. For example, red teamers won't talk about spending 15-hour days because they finally managed to get a credit to get a ball on the table and they don't want to lose it, right? And they won't tell you that they'll skip lunch because they don't want to lose their access to the environment. So what I need to do is monitor how I'm spending my time and how I'm spending my money. Phil Venables put this very well back in 2014, where he basically said attackers have budgets and bosses too, right? Like, the concept is that as an attacker, I've got money to make in most instances. If I'm doing it for intelligence or anything like that, then I have a product to deliver to my management and to the stakeholders who want to understand that. If I'm a business that's engaged a red team, I'm trying to understand what the current situation is that I'm playing in, like we've got going on, right? So Dino Dozovi also pointed out that basically your job in the blue team is to reduce the value of attacks while raising the costs, right? And this can be done through a number of different strategies. Most of the strategies we're going to look at today are all about raising the cost, right? Reducing the value of the information is a whole lot harder. If you wanted the classic example, that would be PCI, right? We had credit card numbers everywhere for the longest period of time, and now it's very easy to get masked credit card numbers, but you sometimes have to go through a lot more hoops to get unmasked credit card numbers, right? That's reduction in value of the data for the effort that I put in. So, in a nutshell, what I really want people to start doing is stop thinking about how to make my job harder in the sense of all these security controls we're putting in, and think of it more like accounting, right? How is it that you can make me have to spend more money, or if I'm an attacker, I have to use a 0-day, or more advanced techniques, or more risky techniques? And the reason is because when I start taking risks, I start making mistakes, right? If I'm going out of my playbook, if I'm going out of my strategies, then I'm going to start making some serious mistakes. A good blue team and a good defensive team would look at that and they'll be looking for attacker mistakes, right? This is often referred to as attacker OPSEC, however you want to term it, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you want to get it to the point where I'm frustrated, where I'm taking risks. You want to turn me into this guy, right? Stealing a Tech 9 and trying to order McDonald's at 11 o'clock in the morning, right? Because this is where we end up. On a good red team, what a lot of red teamers won't tell you is that it's week 3, you've finally got a foothold in the environment and you got a phone call from the CISO at the target saying, ha, we just caught you. So the idea is that you want to really drive the frustration. So the first strategy for this is multi-factor authentication. Now this is pretty much a dead horse, right? Like, we all know that multi-factor authentication is important. We all know that if we put it into the right places that we're going to make it harder for people to log in. But this really disrupts the get creds part of get creds and own stuff, right? And it's important to do right. So MFA everything. So when you're deploying these technologies and you're thinking about them, start thinking about what the approaches that attackers may take. So for a great example is, if you MFA your VPN, make sure you MFA the ADFS that you always also have exposed to the internet, because there might be a chance that the service that the ADFS is authenticated off is also talking back into your corporate environment, right? So you need to think really sort of how it sort of goes about. When it comes to what types of 2FA, it's been discussed earlier today, right? Like UTF is best, anything that's sort of non-phishable, as we call them, but any 2FA is better, right? Like SMS and voice is another great example on why I think we're sort of missing the mark on this one, right? And it comes with a lot of accounting benefits from the blue team's point of view, right? You're raising the cost in the sense of it's going to be more frustrating for me to use the creds, right? In the case of something like SMS, let's say I can do a number portability attack and I can get a hold of that employee that I've targeted. I can port their number, right? They're going to be on the service desk at 9 o'clock the next morning saying like, wow, my phone doesn't work, right? And there's an investigation. Well, why was that SIM shifted? It was shifted because someone made a request to have it shifted. Who made the request to have it shifted? I don't know, some dude who called us up. And so you start going through the process again. So it's hindering, it's making it a lot harder. One of the main benefits that we'll touch on a little bit later is you end up with a side effect of distributed alerting. So it's not unusual for us nowadays to be able to say, right, we've stolen 25 credentials or 200 credentials or whatever credentials we've got. We've enumerated the entire outside of the organization. They've got VPNs, but they've also got RDS, right? Remote desktop services. We can log in to the RDS services. So maybe they forgot to fully 2FA the RDS services. You launch the, hey, give me the Internet Explorer or whatever application that's published through RDS services. And in the meantime, this has happened in the background where the users received a push request saying, hey, you're trying to run this application on this thing, do you want to approve it, right? And that's got its called multiple times, right? It's blind to us. There was no indication that 2FA was in play for us, but for the user, they get an alert, which basically, in theory, I say theory, the blue team gets told that something's up with credentials on their environment. The next strategy is restrict the operating environment. So if you were to think of this back to the pinball analogy, what you want to do is you want to make the table smaller, right? And you want to have it so that I have to perform lots of crazy trick shots to be able to actually get further into the environment, right? So sandboxing is a great example of this, right? Like whether or not it's app locker or SRP or anything that's sort of going to restrict my ability to run my code. And that's because as a red teamer, I'm playing from a playbook, right? I have strategies, right? I have a set of tools, right? And every time I have to shift those tools or change them around or my tools don't work, life gets hard, right? And so the other main thing that you get from restricted environments is that if you're restricting the operating environment for the attacker, you're also reducing what the surface that you need to monitor from a blue team point of view, right? Which means that unusual actions can actually go through more scrutiny. So the accounting's pretty simple, right? And you can restrict my code execution. Now, everything that is out there will have a bypass, right? There's a dozen talks on various different whitelisting and sandboxing bypasses. All you have to do is look at Google Chrome, who does sandboxing amazingly, and there's still bypasses that exist within that. If you have a look at sort of any of the Windows code execution restrictions, there's always, inevitably C drive user app data, something that allows the Citrix WebExe thing to be able to do its stuff. I don't know the terminology because all I know is I put a DLL there and I win, right? So you kind of go through that, but it's still time. It's still effort to work out. I'm running blind, right? I don't know what exists behind it, right? If it's a restricted environment in the sense of something like a VDI environment, right? Virtual desktops, I don't know what controls are on the hypervisor behind that. I can make some assumptions, but assumptions make an ass out of me and you, right? Like, I want as much knowledge as possible before I start running risky activities. So it really does make us run a whole lot slower. It really disrupts the playbook, and it really sort of drags away from being able to just run run-of-the-mill attacks, right? Sorry. Strategy number 3. So this is a real soft strategy, but it's basically say yes, right? There's an interesting point to be made by Rob Joyce. Now, Rob is head of the tailored access operations for the NSA. And last year he went to Enigma conference and stood on stage and said, here's how you can disrupt our job. Now, if we put aside the fact that the head of TAL was sitting on stage at a public conference saying, here's how we attack people, and put aside the fact that he said everyone should run AV everywhere all the time, he actually had a really interesting point. And the point he wanted to make was, know your network and know your users. And I think this is a point that's greatly underlooked. He said that most nation-state attackers really want to understand the environment that they're targeting, right? They'll understand the architecture, the products, the technologies, everything that goes into it, as good as, if not better than you. And that's exactly the approach that I like to take on red teams myself, right? If I can get a foothold that allows me access to SharePoint, and then I can rip down all the architecture and as-built documentations and processes on who administers what where, it's gold, right? Now, the problem that we come across is time and time again on red teams is we go ahead and we compromise the server, and in the back of our minds, we're looking at it going, everything else we looked at in this environment looked pretty good, and this box is a weird anomaly, right? Like, maybe it's a Jenkins server with like no auth on it, or maybe it's like, you know, a Microsoft environment, and then all of a sudden there's this random Linux box, right? And the answer is quite often shadow IT, right? And it's getting people owned hard. Like, inevitably the conversation you'll have with them at the end of it is, oh yes, we had no idea that box was there. Or, you know what, we're really pissed off because they came and asked us for that system 6 months ago because they needed to do their job and we said no, right? And so there's a lot to be said about understanding the activity of your users and the systems they want and the process that they're going through. The accounting is pretty simple, right? From an attacker's point of view, all of a sudden the controls that I've seen elsewhere in the environment, let's say multi-factor authentication, or let's say sandboxing and restricted operating environments that I'm running in, all of a sudden appear on those systems that you may not necessarily have wanted, but at least you can keep control on it. Another great example is we see a lot of places who say, yes, we have all our data centers, we've got all our information in-house, but we got this one team that have started pushing stuff up into AWS. And you go, yeah, we got all the AWS tokens, we already own that infrastructure, right? And the reason is because they've said no to cloud deployment. You have to do it on our traditional server model with ops and everything else. And the team is agile or DevOps centric, and so they're going forward anyway, right? They've gone and got their boss's credit card and just paid for it themselves. It's under stationary in the accounting. No one really cares, right? And so if you can keep control of your controls, and especially account management lifecycle, if we go back to the get creds and own stuff, right? The account management lifecycle is super important there as well. You really start slowing us down again, right? If you don't have that, we don't have to worry about it. We just walk into those environments or onto that one server, right? A great example of this that we recently experienced, we were on a red team and we were doing reconnaissance and we were going through and we had some credentials through a side channel attack, and we noticed they were using Dropbox. And we were like, ha ha, Dropbox. We're going to go loot all your data. And so we jumped in and we were treading very carefully because something felt a little bit odd. And we were pulling down a couple of documents and going through. And what we found is that the security team were approached and say, hey, we want to use Dropbox because we don't like this SMB thing. Fair enough. And the security team said, great, let's do it. And what they had in the back end was hooks into the Dropbox for Business APIs that were doing reputation monitoring. So if a user logged in and decided to download a lot of files, alert got sent. They had a control that said, we want the user to be aware of what's going on in their account. Anytime a new browser signed into the account, right, an email got sent or a notification got sent to the user saying, hey, a new device is accessing your data. Anytime that geolocation appeared odd, so if the service was based in Australia, for example, and all of a sudden the connection came from the Ukraine, like throw up an example, right? On this particular case, we were very lucky. We had come in as a user from the data center next door, try to get the IP ranges close together and all that sort of stuff, right? But the point is that we could have very easily treaded less carefully, and we could have very easily been caught. And in fact, when they went through, they actually found like a couple of the rules, because they were still tuning the system, were off, but they had us, like they had our activity in the accounts. And even from a forensics and IR point of view, they were able to say what happened here, right? Which is very important. Strategy number 4 to move along, distributed alerting. So this is a newer concept. We're starting to see it more. You would have seen Dropbox this week release their security bot. But the idea is that users know the environment. I have to move faster. the users know the environment, they know what they're doing in the environment, right? So if you can have the user say, actually, something odd is happening in our environment, or something odd's happening with my account in your environment, then you greatly increase the place of where to look, right? As an attacker, one of the most beautiful things is that logging is everywhere, seams are everywhere, and no one's looking for us, right? So we just walk across the network, right? But if a user's saying, actually, at 2 p.m. I had a notification, or at 2 p.m. I got an alert to say that someone sudoed as me on a box, or at 2 p.m. I got a 2FA push notification saying that someone's trying to RDP into the domain controller as me, right? You can tune where you're looking in that mountain of data that's come from the seam, gone into the seam, to be able to say, right, we're now actually going to go have a look here. The best example of this is Slack had originally deployed it last year, and they have a thing where basically, if a user does a sudo or an SSH to a sensitive place or a sensitive script run, it'll send them a message on Slack, say, was this yes or no? If the user says yes, they get a push notification to their phone that they have to accept. If they say no, or the push notification fails, an incident's raised inside the Slack security team. And I was curious about how this was going for them, so I reached out to Ryan Huber, who works at Slack, and he said it's going extremely well for them, right? And they have managed to gain a lot more, I assume a lot more visibility on the controls on which a lot of users are taking inside the environment, right? And so this will be a trend that you'll see sort of go through a whole lot. Best case, from an accounting point of view, you catch us, and you'll catch us pretty quickly, right? Like if I'm sitting there and on Slack, I all of a sudden get that, like, someone's trying to duo as me to SSH into a key box, right? Like that's going to raise alarm bells. Worst case, you're going to slow us down because you'll catch us once, and then we'll say, okay, well, something clearly is going on here, and we're going to have to figure out the user behavior. We're going to have to monitor them. We're going to have to figure out what's going on with that. Strategy number 5, restrict privilege. So Bloodhound is a tool that's amazing, but the idea is that if this was accounts and groups within your network, so let's say I'm at the top of the tail, how many nodes and how many accounts and groups do I have to jump through or try to gain access to before I hit domain admin, right? And the answer is usually 1, right? Because the domain admin has a low priv account and a high priv account, and they reuse the same password on both accounts, right? But the idea is that if you get on top of your Active Directory controls and your IAM controls and your SSO controls and your account management controls, then basically you can really start figuring out what the path an attacker would take to, say, go from standard user to this group or to this target system or to this target user. Really understanding that is important, and one of the things we do in Red Teams is we spend a lot of time parsing Active Directory data, right, before we even start a large number of lateral movement attacks. We're pulling it out and we're trying to evaluate, usually via LDAP, what is the trust relationships between the systems we want to get to that we've gotten from the documentation that we just read through to the target we have. There's another philosophy here, which is rather than deny, right? Restrict access doesn't always mean deny, but what you might do is limit the window of opportunity, right? So Netflix recently dropped Bless. There's a number of other tools out there we've seen deployed, but the idea is if I want to run a privileged action as a privileged user, I have to request that that privilege is enabled, and then it might only be enabled for 4 hours. Right, so it really can reduce the window of opportunity for exploitation. So let's say I've had to go through a 2-factor attack to get that user account, and I finally gain access to the system. Maybe that access is only valid for 4 hours. The main accounting benefit here is you can really increase the complexity of the hoops that I have to go through, right? If you have a network with 30,000 users and you've got 100 domain admins, then I'm going to get there pretty easily. If you have a network with 30,000 users and you have 100 domain admins that need another admin to say, yes, you are able to allow to run this action, or you have, a control that says, all right, but you have a 4-hour window provided that the change request actually said that you're allowed a 4-hour window on this time and stuff, right? And all of these are bypassable. All of these we could work around, but the point is, from an accounting point of view, it's just pushing the time out so hard, right? And if you go back to that threat modeling we were thinking about, anytime you push the complexity and anytime you push the time out, from an attacker's point of view, I might only have so much budget and I may be moving on to the next target, the softer table, right? The point that I wanted to make on this one as well is, like, one of the other things you'll often do when you end up in a restricted environment is, you'll say, okay, well, we know the admins have access, so we're going to go hit them. This is our experience from phishing every admin ever. what you find is that you send out a fish and you hit a bunch of target users and they all give you credentials, and then you hit the sysadmins and the DevOps teams and then you get nice try arsehole, right? Like they just don't, they look at it and go, that's not ours. Macros, will be real quick on this one, but the idea is get rid of macros, kill them. You don't need them coming through your mail gateway, right? Like if we think back to get creds and own stuff, the reason why I'm sending you a document is because there's a good chance that I'm going to land somewhere in the environment that's going to be useful to me, right? Corporate desktops are usually great. And if I can execute in your environment, then there's a good chance I can get privilege in your environment. If I can get privilege in your environment, then I can just drop creds and I can sit and wait and move laterally and drop creds from other boxes until I get the creds that I want to go own the thing that I need, right? If you can't strip macros completely out of your organization, at least try for the gateway, right? Email gateway coming in. There's usually another method that's available for third parties to be able to send through. If you've got file transfer services and stuff set up for transactions, you can add another layer of authentication that this macro document's coming in. You can sign the macros. The next gen of Office suites has a whole lot of mitigations on macros because clearly it's a problem. There's a reason why the ASD recommend it, and that's because there is a huge number of attackers and indeed pen testers and red teamers who you ask them, like, what's your approach here? And they're like, send a dot, get a shell, drop creds, move on, right? And so that's often the attacker's entire playbook, right? So if you can kill that, they'll move on to the next target. From my point of view, it really means that I have to spend a lot longer figuring out how to get to the environment I want, right? So let's say I failed to get through email methods to get a shell or to go through the process, and I've somehow managed to get a SQL injection and get a foothold on the DMZ. Well, I might be 3 layers away from the actual systems and corporate environments that I want to get access to. Strategy number 7, situational awareness. Know when your house is burning down. This is probably the greatest defensive slide ever shown at a conference, and that was from Zane Lackey when he was giving a talk about SD security strategy. And the idea is like you might have a huge amount of data, you might have a huge amount of user activity going on, but you're not looking at it, you're not parsing it. You might be paying a SOC to look at it, but they're playing Xbox, right? And so if you look here, if this is 11 o'clock at night and all of a sudden failed logins on your DC went through the roof, you know something bad's happened, right? It might be legitimate bad, it might be a script went wrong bad, but the point is like out of that mountain of data that you want to look at, that's where you want to go and have a look, right? And it may be that this spike was caused by something that your scene rules hadn't even considered or are looking for, right? It may be that this is the number of packets sent to the DC environment that aren't standard legitimate Active Directory ports, which may indicate like, you know, port scanning or scanning of boxes and services in the environment. But really sort of you can get a heads up. You can get a step ahead by looking at a spike on a graph, right? If you go into a lot of places where they have like, you know, release engineering teams and they've got huge numbers of transactions going through the environment. If you walk into their ops centers, they don't have screens of Splunk going down, right? They have graphs. And the reason is because they want to know when their house is burning down. When the graph drops, something bad's going on, right? The other strategy that's coming out is canaries. Now, the idea of canaries is nothing new. For those unfamiliar in the modern sense is that you drop them into your network. They sit there, they look like a normal service, they act like a normal service, they just sit there benignly. But as soon as someone port scans it, or as someone tries to log in with credentials, it sends a notification, right? You can put canaries into Office documents. So you create payroll special data backup.xlsx and you put it in G drive somewhere, right? And then all of a sudden, if that document's opened, the canary fires, and you know that someone's looking at stuff that they shouldn't be looking at, right? This was honeypots back in the day, right? And we wanted situational awareness on what attacks were occurring on the internet. The problem is the internet became so much signal, so much noise that the signal to noise ratio dropped, that intelligence became useless to us. But inside your own environment, that intelligence is actually gold, right? You get a step up, you get a foot ahead. And there's nothing worse than a canary dying in a mine. I heard it mentioned earlier today. The concept of the canary is that, like, you know, when dangerous gases come, the canary dies and you get the hell out. Or in this case, you might respawn, right? And from an attacker's point of view, there's nothing worse than knowing the blue team is actively looking for you, right? Like, we run on the assumption they're not, unless we're doing some, you know, crazy tasks. Certain co-workers of mine would disagree with that assumption because they live in an interesting place. But the whole point is that, like, you know, you can get a step ahead. If you can get a step ahead, you can get the bigger picture, while they're in the environment, right? Maybe it's you just make the phone call to your third party, you call in your mandiant or whoever you want to call in to be able to help you in that situation. But you get a heads up, right? And that can be super annoying. And especially when you're in the environment and all of a sudden you've been on a server for 2 weeks and there's been no activity and all of a sudden 4 admins log in. That's great for me because I just got 4 DA hashes, but it also means 4 admins suddenly became interested in this box that I've been operating off for 4 weeks, right? So to summarize, right, is if we really think about how to hinder, how to make things longer, how to make me jump through more hoops, how to increase me make a mistake. Sorry, is that all good? If I, yeah, okay. Increase the likelihood of me making a mistake, you increase the chance of detection, which is actually the point of the blue team, right? Like, you have a blue team because you assumed bad shit is happening in your environment and you want to be able to get ahead of it, right? The strategies are often really simple, but they're also super powerful, right? And they go a long way. So yeah, now that I've got this talk off my chest, I can now go back to proper offensive security stuff and stop giving you guys a heads up. But this is, in our experience, the strategies that work to really keep us awake at night. So thank you.